Welcome in to another edition of the Game Plan live. That's Greg Barnes. I'm Tommy Ashley. Jason Staples will be here in a minute. We're sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt and JohnnyT-Shirt.com. All right, Greg. You've had a couple weeks off, well earned, well needed time away, but you're back on the game plan. And I must say that if I'm being totally honest, last week I don't know if Jason and I took Virginia very seriously. We took it seriously, took our job seriously, but looking back on that show, aside from saying run the damn football, we didn't say a whole lot, didn't really give Virginia a chance. And it played out that way on the field. Your thoughts looking back at that game in the sense that we look back at that game and maybe it focuses North Carolina a little bit more going into this one on Saturday night.
Well, look, you guys were well within your rights to have that opinion because I think everybody did. If you go back 20 years, teams favored by 24 points on the nose have won 2 games in 20 years. Now, more, when you start saying 24 and over, there's more wins there, but it's a rare thing for a team picked by that much to lose the way North Carolina did. There was no reason for them to lose that game, especially being at home in the primetime setting. And it really gets back to the fact that we all thought, or at least we're beginning to believe, that maybe this team was different than some of these previous teams that had inexplicable losses. Last year against Georgia Tech, Florida State 2021. Florida State 2020. This team hasn't proven that it is different. And because of that, each game moving forward, beginning with this weekend, people need to be well aware that, hey, Carolina's not past sleepwalking, against an opponent. They're just not there as a program yet. And that's on the coaching staff. That's the next step that these guys have to be able to make. But to your point, if last weekend was not the wake up call that they needed, then forget it. This team will not actually contend for an ACC championship. If they've learned from last weekend and they understand that every time they take a snap in practice, that's an opportunity to prepare for the next opponent. Then they'll get back on track, and I think they'll play well this weekend. But it really is kind of a gut check game. And I think we'll learn a lot about this program, not just the team, but the program in general, by how they perform on Saturday night.
Jason Staples joins us. Jason, that was the opening salvo by Greg Barnes. I agree. I entitled the show Pivotal Game Ahead, and I started to say Hinge Game, and then I Googled Hinge to make sure I wasn't messing up, and it's some dating app. So I took that off and called it a pivotal game. How tough is it to get guys and players motivated to play like Greg just said? That every snap in practice, we're not even talking about games, we're talking about practice, are as important as ever when you have only 12 to 14 games to play a season.
Well, it's a lot easier to get guys to buy into that idea than it is to actually do it day in, day out. I mean, the thing is, and one of the reasons that you start to see, there are a couple reasons that you start to see this kind of upset when you do see it. You usually see it in like mid to late October, early November. And that's because that's the time of year where everybody's dragging. Your legs get heavy. You're tired every day. You've been spending a good amount of time in the training room getting treatment. And, everybody's just a little bit like the opening excitement of the season is worn off. And you're starting to just get into the rhythm of the day to day. And it's really easy to start to settle into going through the motions. Even if you've bought into the importance of every day and all of that. And yeah, I think it's easier said than done. You can get guys to buy into it in terms of the idea, but I think to actually get guys to do it, sometimes, I mean, at the college level, sometimes it takes a little bit of creativity from the coaching staff. Sometimes it takes a little bit of a change up in what you're doing in the practice order or whatever, just to break a little bit of the monotony. Sometimes it means it means amping up the energy in practice for a more heavy padded practice one day. The on the flip side, sometimes it means you need to step off and maybe one week you barely touch each other. It's the hard part is that there's not a clear, easy formula, or more teams would be able to do it. You have to know your football team. You have to know, okay, these guys are slowing down a little because their legs are tired. I need to step off just a little bit for this day and this day so that they're going to have more energy on game day. Or, well, this team is starting to look a little lethargic, and I don't think it's that their legs are just shot. They need to, we're gonna inject a little bit of extra discipline into this practice, and we're gonna require that energy, or they're going to pay for it. I mean, there's a variety of different things you have to do, and you have to press the right buttons, or this sort of thing happens.
Greg, to that point, a lot of people say, and I see it in the chat already, great teams don't lose that type game. Well, there's a difference in great and whatever, but good teams get beat every time. Get beat all the time. That's the reason college, especially college football, is so difficult. It's a one-game series. We talked about it I was giving Don Callahan a hard time Wednesday about the Phillies losing a series, losing two at home or whatever. It's a little bit different when it's a one-off. So how does North Carolina show up, Greg? You say we'll find out a lot about it. How do you think this goes? You've been around this program with Mack and without Mack for a long time, and I think it's a program thing, to your point. Where do they come out? How do they come out Saturday? I think it's huge to get your opinion, but also to see what happens.
Yeah, for sure. Let me start here about the idea of whether this is a good or a great team. We all thought that this early season schedule was going to be good enough that we would know the answer pretty soon, pretty early in the year. And unfortunately, it just really hasn't played out that way. When you start diving into kind of what this schedule has been, it's not very strong. And we look at the F plus ratings, which is a combination of FEE, which is per possession scoring, and SP plus, which is Bill Connolly's metrics, which is explosiveness and those types of efficiencies. When you look at that combined metric, Carolina has played one team inside the top 50, and that's Miami. And of course, I think everybody remembers Carolina had a sizable turnover margin in that game. What was that, 4-0? Is that right?
Miami game?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, it was 4-0. So they won that game by 10 against Miami and won turnover battle 4-0. And that was by far their best win of the season thus far. So I think we're still learning about this team, and I don't think the schedule was near as tough early on as it probably could have been. You got to give Carolina credit for taking care of business for sure, but I still think there's question marks about how good this team actually is. Now, to your question, Tommy, Mack Brown has shown that he can recruit talent, not just in the high school ranks, but he's done a really good job in the transfer portal. And he can put talented teams on the field. And as with pretty much all sports, if you have more talent, then you have an edge going in. And then it gets down into the coaching specifics. And for whatever reason, the last couple of years, when Mack has had more talent, there's been some of these games where his teams just do not match their opponent, and whether that be in scheme, whether that be in effort, whether that be intensity, they've just fallen flat. And I think that's the question of why does that happen? And is it just kind of a fluky thing? And I think if you look to last year, it was just kind of a fluky thing. And you got late in the year and they lose to Clemson and Oregon, but those are two really good teams. And NC State was a good team last year, even though Carolina should have won that game. So it's just a game here or there that's a head scratcher. And Mack has not been able to shake that. But if you remove that particular game from the equation, Carolina has shown an ability the last couple of years that, for the most part, when they're more talented and they play pretty well, they're going to win a lot of their games. Now, when you start talking about Atlanta, I don't think any Carolina fan likes to go to Atlanta. Carolina's lost 10 or 12 down there, and basketball's probably close to that, it feels like. And that's going to be a tough game, at night. As we'll talk about, Georgia Tech, maybe not as good this year as they were last year, even though they got a better quarterback. But that is a team that has played very well against ranked opponents. I just pulled that stat up a few minutes ago, but what is it?
Tech against ranked opponents.
Yeah, I just lost it. Anyway, they have a really good record against ranked opponents. Here you go. They've won 3 straight and 4 of the last 5 against ranked ACC foes. So they've shown a tendency to kind of elevate their play, when it's a big time opponent that they're playing. So a lot of those things kind of go into it that make this a difficult game. But I think Carolina, because they are the better team, provided they learn from last week, which I think they will, they're going to be okay Saturday night. That doesn't mean they're going to win necessarily, but I think they'll be in the right mind space, and they've got the talent to be able to go down there and win a tough game.
Jason, Greg mentioned 10 of 12 losses down there. I've been to Atlanta a couple times to see them play. It's cool view from the top of the stadium there. It's the thumbnail for this podcast. But why is it that North Carolina has such a tough time going to Georgia Tech? It's not player specific. It's not coach specific. It's just a thing down there. Why does that happen with certain teams and certain locations, in college football especially?
I really wish I knew. I mean, this one is a bit of a mystery to me, especially since it's both football and basketball. I mean, it's bizarre. I mean, my best guess would probably be that they need to keep those guys away from the varsity the day before the game. Just maybe make sure they're monitoring their diets or something. I mean, I don't know what's going on.
To Nate
But, I mean,
McCullum's
really-
credit, Nate McCullum said, "Yeah, don't go to the varsity. I don't eat that stuff." So maybe they learned from that. But anyway,
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's it. That maybe it's maybe that's the trap aspect of that. You go to the varsity the day before when you get into town, and then all of a sudden, the next day you're feeling pretty sluggish. I don't know, because again, anything that would be football specific wouldn't account for the trouble that basketball's had down there. And anything that accounts for basketball and football is, pretty broad. I think that some of it just has to be the randomness inherent to the game. That, it's just statistically speaking, there's going to be weird patterns that emerge. And sometimes there just isn't a causality to it that beyond the correlation itself. And I'm not sure that this isn't one of those. I mean, obviously, North Carolina is a team that Georgia Tech takes really seriously and probably puts a lot into in both sports every year. But I mean, that's not untrue for basketball for pretty much everybody in the conference or country, really. And then for football, I mean, it's been a coastal game. So I don't know. I don't know that there's an easy answer there. I mean, I do think with football, the weirdness of the Paul Johnson offense and trying to defend what they did for so long, for a while, that made sense. Like, look, you're facing a different kind of beast, and they didn't do a great job against that. But the weird thing is that it kept going after Johnson left when Georgia Tech was really bad. So I don't have a great explanation for that. I don't know.
it's one of those things. It's like Fedora in Pittsburgh, and
Well, the Fedora Pittsburgh thing was kind of explainable.
yeah, somewhat.
I
Well,
mean, it's just that particular defense, like what the offense that Fedora ran was literally invented to go against the kind of defense that Pitt runs. Like, it was put together to try to be a pressure defense buster.
Yep.
And then, he gets that matchup every year, and it's like, great. This is like exactly what our defense wants, or our offense wants to face.
Let's
So
play
that one
this
made
guy.
more sense. But Georgia Tech, you're looking at different coaches on both sides, different coordinators, different schemes, different qualities of opponents, different quality of program, year in, year out. And the results have mostly held steady. That's the bizarre thing about it. I don't know.
Yeah, Jordan Falls in the chat says, by my math, and I'll take your word for it because I don't do math, Carolina basketball is 8-10 in Atlanta since '98.
That's unbelievable. I mean, is there another team? Is there another team or location where Carolina basketball has a losing record since 1998?
I would assume perhaps Duke, but
Yeah,
I think
Cameron's
that's fairly close.
probably
Cameron,
about it.
maybe.
Yeah, but I mean that's that. I doubt there's another one.
Yeah, no,
And
not
Georgia Tech of all teams.
Virginia'd be the only other one, but that's not since '98. So
Yeah.
Well, Greg, let me ask you one thing. One reason I think, and it's parlays into last week and this week. One reason I believe Pittsburgh kept losing to Fedora is because Narduzzi would not run the football and would not keep running the football. I mean, James Conner could have run for 300 yards in a couple of those games against North Carolina, and for whatever reason, he said, "No, we're going to throw it a little bit." Well, this is exactly what happened last week for North Carolina and Amari and Hampton. And now they go in and they face a Georgia Tech defense that's worse than Virginia's, if I'm not mistaken, at least numbers wise.
I mean,
what did you think about the discussion at press conference about we're just kind of at some point we are who we are and not just balling up the playbook and running the football nonstop?
well, that's a good question, Tommy, because the entire offseason was kind of a critique of Phil Longo and how he was not any good in the red zone and how he just did not have the ability to run the ball when they wanted to run the ball, when everybody knew they were going to run the ball. And as we tried to kind of highlight in the offseason, like, yeah, you can do some things schematically a little bit different, which they've done. But the other team has players too. And Carolina converted more to third and shorts last year than Georgia did on a percentage basis, more than Alabama did on a percentage basis.
And let me repeat that: Georgia, not Georgia Tech, Georgia, and
Georgia
Alabama.
and Alabama. So it's a hard thing to do, especially when other teams know you're going to do it. And what has Chip Lindsey talked about? Said a lot of the same things that Phil did, right? Of that, offense these days is you take what the defense gives you. And so that factors into all this. And I don't know, unless they just make a dramatic change, I don't know that it's going to ever be a situation with this team where Carolina's up by 10 points and it's nothing but run the ball. I would be shocked. That's just not anything Chip Lindsey's ever done. And I don't think that's smart football these days. And it's not like Carolina has a dominant offensive line where they could do it anyway. And the other component of that too is red zone touchdown percentage. Last year's team was better than this year's team through 7 games. So all those are interesting things, and we'll talk more about the comparison between Chip and Phil in the offseason. But I think there was kind of an idea that you bring in a new person and you have a completely changed mindset. It's different, but it's not that different. And so it's just one of those difficult things where you do have to try to capitalize on what the defense has given you. Now, you may be more conservative, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're just going to, 3 clouds and a pile of dust or whatever that phrase is.
3 yards.
3 yards. Yeah. What did I say? 3 clouds? Yeah.
That's good enough. 3 yards in a cloud of tire bits.
There we go. So that's, it's, I understand the frustration that Hampton maybe didn't run the ball more late, but in going back and watched it, I didn't think it was like irresponsible what took place. I think they were just trying to hit on some things and it just didn't work out. And then once you get behind the chains, you're kind of limited to what you can do.
We are talking game plan, North Carolina versus Georgia Tech. Greg Barnes, Jason Staples, and myself, Johnny T-Shirt, of course, sponsoring us. Jason, uh, this is a question I have. You've coached football. You've been around one of the greats to do it. Um, Back in your day, how difficult is it, or walk me through the process of a head coach seeing something going sideways and uh, stepping in and says, "No, we're doing this." I don't think it happens as much as people think. It's not like Madden or college football, NCAA 14, pressing the power run button every time. What's that like? What's that dynamic like between coordinators and head coaches during games?
It really depends. That relationship can vary pretty significantly. I mean, I know, Coach Bowden years ago, he basically turned the entire offense, turned the whole keys over to Mark Richt. And that was partly because Mark at one point, it was probably 94. It was before I got down there. 94, 95, somewhere in there, I think. He went to Coach Bowden and said, "Coach, I'm trying to call the game here, and you keep jumping on the phones and making suggestions, and you're killing my rhythm here. I can't focus because I keep hearing your suggestions. And like, if you want to call the game, call the game. If you want me to call the game, then try to give me some space to call the game. And then, if you've got something really, really imperative, then jump on. But can we cut that just a little bit?" And Coach Bowden basically from that point forward said, "It's your offense. You do what you want to do." And that carried forward basically with his coordinators from there. I mean, Jeff Bowden did the same thing, essentially didn't go so well. And then Jimbo Fisher came in and ran the entire side of the ball there too. So it can vary. And again, with a coach who used to call plays, it's really easy to kind of, all right, hey, let's run the toss sweep here. Let's run the toss sweep. Like, coach, just step off. Even in high school, like I different points was, I was on the phones and we were working on different stuff as a staff. And, depending on the dynamics, I mean, I at different points as, I was the quarterback's coach in one place and receivers coach in another, and basically coordinated the passing game for both teams. So I'd have different stuff I'd be pointing out on the phones, between drives a lot of times. Like, hey, let's take a look at so on and so forth. Quarterback told me he really likes X right now. When we get this down in distance, let's look at this. So you get that on the phones between position coaches or between, guys in their particular area. Sometimes in drive, like coach, they just jumped to such and such coverage on this the last time. Let's look at this. You'll get that. And then I've been on the phones when the head coach jumped on and said, "Will you guys stop throwing the effing ball?" like no more RPOs. And we got that at one point because we almost fumbled no more read plays. We almost fumbled an exchange when we were trying to kill a game. And the coach basically said, no more read calls. And it was like, "Well, coach, that's our base call here." And he said, "No more read calls. You make it clear to him that he hands this ball off the rest of the way." And so we had to find a signal to add to our repertoire at that point for the rest of the game. That was, okay, this is our read call, but we added a signal that was like, you're handing that off.
You better give him the ball.
you hand that off or you're standing next to me next play. And that was because the coach got on the phones, the head coach got on the phones and said, "I don't care what you guys want to do right now. We are running this football and we're going to do this. You do it now." So that happens. And that's when chain of command kicks in and you say, "Sir, yes, sir. All right. I disagree, but that's what we're doing. we'll hammer it out on Sunday, or on Saturday, whatever, when we reconvene as a staff and go back over the film, but that's what you do." And so that does happen. And I do think that this last game was a position where I think Mack Brown's kicking himself that he didn't do it. That he didn't jump in and say, "Hey guys, how many carries Hampton got? Let's just hand the ball off."
He's not even sweating over there.
Yeah, just hand the ball off, guys. No more reads. Just hand it off. And that does happen. But again, it's a balance with coaches because you don't want to disrupt. You don't want to, lose lose the dynamic that you have, that you built, that's a trust dynamic. But sometimes you have to step in. And I do think this week probably would have been a time to do it.
So, Greg, before I go to break, give me two stats that are going to be heavily involved in our discussion after the break about the actual game plan for North Carolina.
Well, the first one I think is glaring, especially in light of what happened last week and in light of the conversation we just had. When you look at the ACC numbers, the team that ranks dead last in rushing yards per carry is Georgia Tech, and they're allowing 5.3 yards per carry, which is a lot. Virginia is about a full yard better than that. And then the other one that's of note, and this is kind of on the other side of the ball, is that Georgia Tech leads the ACC in plays of 10 plus yards. So what we're going to be talking about on the flip side here is a very explosive Georgia Tech offense and a very porous Georgia Tech run defense.
It's going to be an interesting discussion. It'll be after the break, but I'm going to talk about Johnny T-Shirt and JohnnyT-Shirt.com right now. Got a word that a lot of folks will order from Johnny T-Shirt because of what we talk about here on these Inside Carolina podcasts and our suggestions. And folks, it's not a suggestion. Much appreciate you shopping there, but I think after you shop there, you realize those guys at Inside Carolina knew what they were talking about. Johnny T-Shirt is just the place to be for North Carolina gear. And you get 10% off if I'm a premium subscriber. I get to see Jason Staples break down videos, and then you give me 10% off. And I get that. It's like free. Look at there. Jason's learning how to do fancy stuff. Did you do that, Bubble? I don't know how to do that, folks, but it's getting too high tech here. Johnny T-Shirts, high tech online. You can order anything you can get in store, mostly online. But you need to go see them, talk to them in person. They're great folks, alumni owned and operated. They're on East Franklin Street. Take care of them. If you're in Chapel Hill this weekend, perfect. It's going to be beautiful in Chapel Hill this weekend. Go by there. If you're there for the basketball game on Friday night and then you're around on Saturday, go see them. Go take care of them. They take care of us. Get your 10% off. Tell them IC sent you. National guys will pay the bills. It's the game plan. North Carolina and Ramblin' Wreck. Okay, I'm going to come back to you, Greg. I took that break early because I wanted to get into this. It seems simple to me for North Carolina's offense, and we're going to start here. And it seems triply simple since what happened last week. Run the damn football. I mean, Virginia had 54 rushes against Carolina. If you'd have told me that Virginia was going to run it 54 times for 200-plus yards against Carolina, I'd have thought you were insane. But they did it, and they won the game. Seems simple, Greg. Tell me why it is. Tell me why it's not.
Well, I mean, in concept, it is simple, right? And I think the interesting thing, and I want Jason's opinion on this in a minute, but there is a lot of reliance in these types of spread offenses, especially with what North Carolina has done over the years, both with Phil and with Chip, and allowing POs to take place and allowing the quarterback to make the proper decision instead of just saying, if you want to check out of a pass play into a run, that's fine. But otherwise, if we're going to run the ball. And that takes away some of those options, because when people complain about, he's not running the ball enough, well, there's a number of times when that's based on Drake's read. If you go back to the App State game, I think that's a good example. What did App State do? Well, they were determined not to allow Drake May to light them up through the air. And so one of the reasons that Omarion Hampton had the breakout game that he had against the Mountaineers is because on a number of plays when Drake May could have thrown the ball, he handed off instead. And remember what was the conversation after that game, right? So, Drake's just not having the type of season we thought he was going to have because he's just not throwing the ball as much. Well, there's a reason for that. And so if Chip Lindsey changes that what does that look like? And I think it's going to be interesting to see if that plays out. because when you really dive into what Georgia Tech has done defensively, they really have not been great. I mean, as I mentioned, 5.31 yards they're allowing per carry, which is worse than the ACC. And then when you start looking at total defense, yards per play allowed, Tech is also at the bottom of the ranking there. They are giving up 6.4 yards per play, which is almost as bad as what Carolina did in 2014. So the opportunity is going to be there, really, however North Carolina wants to do it. But there's going to be potential there to have success on the ground. And it really is just a matter of do you balance things out like Chip Lindsey likes to do with giving what the defense gives you, or do you make a concerted effort to intentionally run the ball more? I don't know that I've seen enough in the Mack Brown 2.0 era to think anything is going to change that dramatically where they're not going to take what the defense gives. But I'm going to tee that up for Jason and see what his opinion on this is.
Jason, get in here. One thing it reminds me of this discussion is Cade Klubnik pulling that ball against Miami in overtime and Dabo saying, nope, that wasn't an RPO, that was a straight handoff, and he pulled it. Don't you just take that out of the quarterback's hands like Greg talked about a little bit earlier? Or do you do what you do and go where you go?
That's what Dabo said they'd done.
And it still didn't work.
He said that was not a read play. That was not an option. That was not a play where the quarterback had the option to pull it. And he pulled it anyway.
Probably walked back to Clemson.
Which the funny thing is, when Miami called the timeout there right before that play, I was sitting on my couch going, if I'm Miami right now, I'm making sure my backers, I'm having at least one backer who's completely responsible for the quarterback, because I think they're going to have a quarterback pull it here and try to win that way. And sure enough, they did it. And then it turned out I was wrong. I was right, but I was wrong because that's not what Clemson had actually called. Right. But I think that's actually part of what Miami did, is basically be prepared for something that they pull and get you on the edge, be ready to run inside out and get that. And they had a backer ready for it. Klubnik, by the way, for all the world, there are times where, he kind of reeks of sort of upper middle class, pretty boy, entitled quarterback kind of feel to me. I don't know about you, but I feel like I've seen this before. And there
one of them Austin, Texas boys,
Yeah, I mean there is a certain air to him that like I've smelled that air before. So I mean that's not to say he's not talented, but this is not the first time he's done that, where he just made that kind of decision to kind of take the game into his own hands, and it was a bad decision. But yeah, that's the thing, is you could take it out of your quarterback's hands in terms of the play call. But this is one of the things that's hard to get across to fans sometimes, is the coaches cannot go out there and do it for the players. Right? This is not Madden, where you call the play and the guy is he's going to do what the algorithm says he's got to do for that play call. This is a thing where you're dealing with, that defensive end is supposed to take that gap. And for whatever reason, that 19-year-old college student just has this idea pop into his head mid-play. No, that gap looks better right now. It just happens. So yeah, that you can't completely take it out. But I do think, getting back to Greg's thing, this is a part and parcel of pretty much all modern football. Because you go back to the 3 clouds and a yard of dust. You go back, if you go back to the old days where you put 10 guys in the box, you got the split end out there who's just for eye candy, and you're just going to run into the pile 3 times and punt. I mean, that's a way to play the game, but you're not going to score a lot of points doing that. And what teams basically figured out is it's easier to score points, and you can score points more consistently if you go where they're not. Right? Like, And, back in the 90s in particular, you started seeing coaches like, okay, look, we can do what we've always done and run the ball here, especially coaches that were not on, powerhouse programs that could just push you around up front. We could do this, but those 3 defensive linemen are better than our offensive line. Our running back's pretty good, but not good enough to make up for that. Or we could spread them out. And now I've got a slot receiver right here who's better than their number 3 corner. And I can get that one-on-one matchup a good amount of time. And he's going to win 6 or 7 of those. And some of those might turn into a big play. But I still need to run the ball a little bit. But by getting some extra guys out of the box, I can vary it a little bit. I can run into a little more space. I've got some opportunities to let my guys win some matchups. And then if I put this on the quarterback, there's the old saying, whoever holds the chalk last is going to win. So defenses are going to come to the line of scrimmage and they're going to have a call. That call is going to be, sort of available pre-snap. If you give your quarterback 2 options where, okay, if he does this, you do this and he's going to be wrong. If he does this, you do the opposite and he's going to be wrong. If the defense is always going to be wrong, it's hard to, you're going to be a lot more efficient on offense. The problem is that sort of thing is predicated on guys throwing and catching, things like that. And North Carolina in particular had some trouble with the catching part on Saturday against Virginia. I mean, how many drives, I didn't actually do the numbers, but how many drives were submarined by a drop?
Well, there were 6 drops.
And that's, by the way, grading pretty generously. You could argue that there were at least 8. I mean, there were at least 8 balls that probably should have been caught that weren't. There were 6 clear drops. And out of those 6 drops, what was that? Probably 4 drives that ended?
At least, yeah.
That's killer.
There's
you can
your
talk
ball
about
game.
running. Yeah, you can talk about running the ball all you want.
Yeah, there's your ball game. And this is where it's explainable. It's understandable if you're Chip Lindsey. Like, look, we haven't done this all year. That guy's open. He's not gonna drop it again. And then he drops it again. You're like, it's just one of those nights. I mean, it's the night where, Greg, you're a golfer. You pull your 9-iron and, you all of a sudden blade it over the green. And you're just like, I haven't hit one like that in 2 years. Like, where did that come from?
I've seen him do that.
You get the next hole, you're like, clearly this isn't going to happen again. And you pull the 9-iron in exactly the same situation. And this time you shank it 30 yards to the right. And you're like, what in the world? And, really good golfers find ways of like, okay, I clearly don't have my full swing here right today. Time to pull out some, punch shots and start to play real safe and do things that are not normal. And Carolina that was the adjustment that they didn't make, was we're clearly just not playing characteristic football right now. And we need to do what we need to do just to hit to the center of the green with a punch shot, club up 2 clubs, hit a punch shot to the center of the green and just try to 2-putt for pars for the rest of the way. And they didn't do that. And I think that's the thing that what Chip's talking about taking some of it out of Drake's hands in certain situations. It's look, things aren't going as well as what we'd like in this context, but we still have a 10-point lead and we're running the football at will. Just start running the football.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you take the read call out and you just say, okay, instead of, indie back dash, which might be an inside zone, let's say it's a typical Malzahn call, inside zone, split zone with a quarterback dash call where he's got the option to read it, or, you have a indie back, just split zone with a tag for an RPO. Maybe you just leave off the tag. And then, that just takes it out. And that's what you have. Quarterback can still sometimes audible to something else, but that's all you got.
I like Sean Crawley's comment. Just don't make it complicated on the road and win the game from North Carolina. Greg, before I flip to North Carolina's defense, because I think that's going to be.
Can I make 2 points real quick and then?
Yes, that's what I wanted. I wanted to let you get in because
all right.
I just woke up from Jason's monologue. Love you, Jason.
It's fair.
start talking golf, and we can go all night. Um, so here's the thing. Like you mentioned Virginia last week, right? And what did they do? They ran the ball 54 times. So they were committed to taking advantage of the one area that they thought they could strive in. You know what the crazy thing is about that? Even after last week's game, Virginia ranks 124th nationally in yards per carry at 3.0. So that was not a good running team coming in. Nowhere near as good as Carolina, but yet they had a formula and they stuck with it time and time again. So that's just a kind of a reference point. The other detail, though, in terms of talking about taking what the defense gives you, because Georgia Tech's defense is as porous as it is, Georgia Tech has given up more 40-yard passing plays than anybody else in the ACC this year. They've given up 8 40-yard passing plays.
You know what they're called, Greg? That's called cheese.
Cheese.
Don't take the cheese.
That is catastrophic plays, right? As Gene Chizik likes to say. So you're going to have opportunities. And if you go down there and you play scared and you're playing not to kind of screw things up, well, what happens? You get into the fourth quarter and it's maybe a one-possession game, and anything can happen like we saw last weekend. So you can't neuter yourself. You have to be smart about how you play. You have to do what works with the talent that you have. And we've seen this Carolina offense be very explosive. This is one of the better offenses Carolina's ever had. And so if you just start playing scared a little bit, you start to kind of work yourself into trouble for no reason, just because you're trying to be conservative. And so I think people need to understand that if you just go down here and you say, well, their defense is not really good, we can just run it all day and grind out a victory. Yeah, but you're also going to leave yourself open for an upset. Do what you do best. And when you look at Georgia Tech's defense, you can exploit them both passing and throwing, but passing and running. At that point, Georgia Tech really has no answer, because if you're not making Carolina one-dimensional, forget it.
Therein lies the rub. Is how do you game plan it? There's opportunities all around. How do you game plan it to maximize it? And Jason, your point, and I'm going to go to the defensive side of the ball. Your point about not seeing that it wasn't going well last week and just changing it up is the mistake, or is the bad choice there.
It's a whole lot easier to see in hindsight, though. I mean, I've been I've been in that situation on the sideline where you finish the game and you're like, man, like if I'd known we'd kept screwing ourselves over doing it this way, uncharacteristically, then we'd have changed it.
Yeah.
But we haven't done that all year, so like hindsight, it's easy to make that call.
It is very easy to sit in these seats and make those calls, and it's very easy to sit in the stands and make those calls. And that's sort of why I asked the question to Lindsey Monday. I said, have you ever just thrown away your game plan mid-game and gone with it? And he said no, and then I followed up with the question, you can't. I mean, these guys have worked on stuff all week. It's not that simple, but it certainly is simple on Sunday and Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday nights sometimes. Let's talk defense. A lot of questions in the chat about the defense, but Jason, I'm going to ask you one, because this is a place that you did some film study. Dwayne Hamlet, has the D-line regressed? North Carolina D-line regressed this season. Obviously, Kamen Rucker's been a monster all year. Against a Georgia Tech team that's going to try to run. You're going to have a quarterback that can run the football. I think everybody got excited to see that they shut down Schrader, and Schrader could run the ball, but I think Haynes King's a whole different animal. Tell me about this defensive line for North Carolina going into this one.
It's an interesting question. I don't think they've regressed. I think it looks a little bit like they've regressed because they had 16 tackles for loss in the opener. Right? So here's a nice quiz. They had 16 tackles for loss in the opener. How many have they had since?
16?
Close.
You set the bar really high.
They've only had 24. They've got 40 on the season. 16 of them were in the opener.
Wow.
All right. So, I mean, you had 16, 4, 1, 5, 3, 6, 5. So it's not that they've regressed. There's a massive outlier at the beginning of the season that gave a different impression than what this team really is up front. Because if you start looking at the tackles for loss, which I think is generally a pretty good measure of how well a team is playing up front. It's not the only measure, but it's a measure that, is kind of a quick and dirty. They had 5 tackles for loss against Virginia and 6 against Miami. And those are the two highest totals they've had all season, other than that South Carolina game. So, and there was some concerning getting pushed around a little bit up front against App State at times. There was some concerning getting pushed around. I mean, have we forgotten the first quarter at Pitt? Right? They looked like a blocking sled in that first quarter against Pitt, and they eventually turned that around and managed to make some plays and win defensively there. But I think they are who they are, and I think maybe the most disappointing thing so far this season is that Carolina. I think the edges have played well. I think Rucker and Evans have been among the better edges in the conference. They both played really well, in my opinion. On my analysis. But I just think the defensive tackle play has been underwhelming from the jump, honestly. They've not gotten the difference-making defensive tackle play that they hoped for all season. You look at, I don't know what Murphy's numbers are here, but you look at, let's see, Murphy came into the season, you're kind of featuring him. He's now got 2.5 tackles for loss, 1 quarterback hurry. I'm looking at CFB stats here on the season. And for, a guy that you kind of expected to be maybe your bell cow defensive tackle coming in, that's underwhelming, right? And he's been, hot and cold, mostly sort of lukewarm. You go down the list and, Murphy has 2.5 tackles for loss. Tamari Fox has 1.5. And, you're just not getting a ton of production from that position. And, you'd hope that maybe a Travis Shaw would show you more than he has, but he hasn't. And, we talked about that possibility at the beginning of the year. Tommy, we talked about that he'd have to show more toughness than what we saw from him in camp. And I really think that's been a problem on this defense, has been that the defensive tackle position has been, just really average.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, Jason, about South Carolina kind of being an outlier. I mean, if you look at what's taken place since then, South Carolina is tied for 123rd nationally in giving up 30 sacks this year. A lot of those were to Carolina. But that's been an issue for the Gamecocks all year long. This offensive line's not any good. When you contrast that with Georgia Tech, they're tied for 11th in sacks allowed. They've only given up 7 all year long, 7 in 7 games. So I don't think this is a game where you're going to expect Carolina to get many, if at all, any sacks. And then, tackles for loss will be a little bit different. But that's something to watch, obviously, is the line of scrimmage. I feel like, you can say it for every game. But what Carolina is able to do defensively at the point of attack is going to determine how this game plays out. Because Georgia Tech's offense is good enough, and we'll get into the specifics shortly. But if they can win consistently at the point of attack, it's going to be a shootout. And this is a game where the defense really needs to step up and slow down what Georgia Tech wants to do.
Greg, let's get into those specifics a little bit. We talked about Haynes King, and I asked Chad Bishop on the Next Level. If folks haven't watched the Next Level, it's out on YouTube. If you want to listen to these podcasts, it'll be right after this. The audio for that will be right after this on this same feed. Haynes King can make you pay. I mean, a 71-yard run from a quarterback is almost shocking to see. But he can sling it around a little bit. and they've got some receivers that can make some noise and a decent running back. So what does North Carolina? What are they going against, and what is the importance of this North Carolina defense stepping up, being exceptionally focused on Saturday, unlike last week?
Yeah, I think kind of a good way to look at it is, Garrett Schrader is what everybody kind of circles in terms of Carolina really shut down what Syracuse wanted to do. And Garrett's really kind of the main guy in that offense. That's not necessarily the case with Georgia Tech. Yes, Haynes King's the guy that kind of makes everything click. They've got several running backs that are really good. I think what's most surprising is, Georgia Tech's offensive stats are really impressive. We mentioned Virginia being so poor running the ball, averaging 3 yards per carry, 124th nationally. Georgia Tech's 23rd nationally at 5.1 yards per carry. And Haynes King is a big part of that, but he's not it. He's averaging 7.4 yards per carry. Jamal Haynes is their main guy, 5.6 yards per carry. Trey Cooley, 4.3. And those three guys have all rushed for, over 200 carries that they've carried the ball. So that's really a good option there. And then, I mentioned Georgia Tech not giving up many sacks. Haynes King is yet another guy, right? Another quarterback who, when he's given time and he's kept clean, he's really good. He has an 80.8 offensive rating when kept clean. Not very good at all under pressure, 37 grade, 37.3, which is pretty poor. And that's when he's been sacked. Obviously, is when he's under pressure. That's the only time he's been taken down. The thing with Haynes King, and this is where Carolina needs to capitalize, is that he is a turnover machine. And if Haynes King is able to stay clean in the pocket and play above, keep up with the chains, that's going to be a tough ask. But if you can get him under a little bit of duress and get him behind the chains a little bit, well, now you're going to have the opportunity to create some turnovers. The games that Georgia Tech has lost this year that are head scratchers, it's because they've lost the turnover battle by 2 or more. Bowling Green, they lost it by 3. Last week against Boston College, they lost it by 2. And so that's really the name of the game. So this is a good Georgia Tech offense that has has potential to shoot itself in the foot, primarily because of Haynes King. And so Carolina has you've got to be able to slow down the running game. And if you can do that, then you're able to kind of get after the quarterback and create some of these turnover opportunities.
Yeah, King 17 touchdowns. He will throw it to the other team, though, 9 interceptions. And I know Chad, when we talked to him on Next Level, said a lot of those were sort of fluky plays, but the bottom line, 9 times he's thrown the ball that's ended up in the opponent's hand. Jason, the defensive approach here, is it all on the defensive line and the linebackers? You feel like North Carolina's corners can stand up. It's going to be interesting because if I'm correct, Georgia Tech has the solid receivers. None of them are overly big. They're all slot type guys playing all over the field. So Chizik's approach here.
Well, actually, before I do that, I want to ask you, Greg, how frustrating was it for you to watch the defensive approach against Virginia this week? Because I know you're defensive. You love defense. You're one of the few people out there who loves defense as much as I do, to watch good defensive football. How frustrating was that to watch?
Yeah, it's that more than probably any game this year is you sell out to stop the run. And if they beat you throwing the ball down the field, then you tip your cap to them. And Gene Chizik, for whatever reason, just has a really difficult time allowing the possibility of a catastrophic play over the top. Pat Narduzzi, with his scheme, he's pretty much saying, you know what? You're going to have a 70-yard play, 1 or 2.
You might have 2. Yeah.
Right. But we're going to bank on the other 8 or 9 possessions. We're going to shut you down. Gene is the complete opposite. And so, a little bit of a head scratcher, especially considering Virginia's limitations.
Yeah. Can I get like a little bit of a happy medium here? Because, I was watching this going, put another guy in the box. Please, will you just please? That guy can't throw. They don't have any receivers who scare you. Like, why are you not doing this?
You can probably run them down from behind if they do get behind you, right?
Right. I'm like, your corners have played pretty well all season. They're handling those receivers right now. They're completing all their passes to one guy. Just double that guy and single cover everybody else and just focus everything else on the run. That was what you could do against Virginia, right? Because they didn't have anybody that scared you downfield. And because their quarterback was not real accurate and was not a big play type thrower. But Virginia was a success rate team. They're trying to scrap out 4-yard play, 4-yard play, 6-yard play, sneak one for, sneak a guy out into the flat and, he's uncovered and get, 35 and now we got a chance to score kind of play. And the frustrating thing was that Carolina could have snuffed that out if they just decided, you know what, we're going to go single high. We're going to cover we're just going to cover you one-on-one, beat us. And I'm confident if they'd had the commitment to do that, I don't think Virginia had the weapons to beat them.
I agree.
I don't think that's true with Georgia Tech.
They got some guys.
Tommy, you mentioned this. Georgia Tech doesn't have a bunch of guys that are big, but they do have some receivers who can fly. Like Leary, the transfer from Alabama, he is like 10-5, I think, in the 100 meters in high school, if I remember right. That's a guy that can run. And he's, by the way, their third leading receiver. He's the guy that caught the one against to win the Miami game, right? Down the stretch.
Yeah.
But you look down the list of their receivers, and they're all guys that can run. If you do lose them, they can hurt you deep. So regardless of what I think the strategy should be against Georgia Tech, I can tell you what the primary concern is going to be from Gene Chiswick's perspective is going to be those guys can beat us deep. So that's going to be first priority is don't get beat over the top. And I think that's going to be, and I think that's justifiable here. If you do look at Haynes King on the season, it's worth noting that Haynes King on the season, his completion percentage is under 60%, which is usually a bellwether for, a quarterback, sort of base level accuracy you expect in the college game is 60%. Now he's right at 59.6. So it's not that far below, but he's not a guy that's going to hit his target all the time. He has errant throws, and that's where some of those picks come in as well. This is not a team that is going to rely on a heavy success rate. This is a team that's going to run the football. They're going to try to run it. It's almost like playing one of the old, traditional power run option teams where it's run it, pass over the top and beat you for a touchdown. So that puts you kind of in a bind in what you're doing defensively. What you have to do is you have to focus on limiting that running game, which is really what they do best. And again, with Haynes King, it's a quarterback who runs probably 4.45. I don't think he's faster. I don't think he's slower than 4.5. He's a very fast quarterback. Might not be quite as fast as he was before the injury that he had at Texas A&M, but he can really run. And then you can combine that with some of the backs they've got. I mean, this is a team that against Miami ran it for 3.67 yards per carry. Against BC last week, 35 carries for 248 yards, 7 yards a carry. They will run the football on you if you don't take that away. So this is one of those games where I think what you do is you're telling your corners to play more bail. You're showing respect for the deep speed. You're really making sure that they don't have a lot of options downfield. But you have your backers and your defensive line, they're triggering fast. And if they want to beat you by throwing to the tight ends, which they don't have a ton of stuff where they're using a lot of that. But if they want to beat you on shallow crosses and on, dump offs to the back and that sort of thing, then you're content coming up and making the tackle. But I think it's the combination. You're pressing the line of scrimmage as much as you can while playing over keeping them from being able to throw deep and over the top against their speed in the secondary. That I think is the approach in this game.
Yeah. What's the line, Greg? Is it still
11,
11?
11 and a half. Yep.
Oh, it sets up to be an interesting one. I mentioned it on the show, on the Next Level show. Trey Cooley, North Carolina product. He will be ready for the Tar Heels, I'm sure. Uh, is it time for predictions, or do we have any more? Anything left you want to get off your chest, Jason? Somebody said in the chat, thought we were going to learn about Georgia Tech, not get more angry about the Virginia game. I thought you nailed the Georgia Tech thing there at the end. It was like one of those just hold on a second and keep listening tweets. But shout out to Cometer 44 for getting in the chat. Anything left before? Oh, G Dixon punting. The hidden yards last week were unbelievable. I don't think
184.
I've ever seen that. Greg, punting is not Carolina's strong suit. You got Kiernan down. You got Tom McGinnis put in a bad spot, came in against Miami, did well. Last week, not well. You have Cole Maynard. And then you have the kickoff issues. Liam Boyd will be checked out all week. See if he can come in and take care of that. How important is special teams, Greg, in a game like this?
Well, any game that's going to be relatively close is very important, especially with teams like to run the ball. Yeah, I don't know. I bet there was tryouts this week trying to figure out who could step in and be consistent. Tommy we always joke about Trace Jones, right? They put him back at punt returner during the Butch Davis days for the sole purpose, to catch the ball. That was it. We're being as conservative as we can be, but we're going to make sure we don't turn the ball over. And I almost think you're kind of there right now. And that's the question of, McGinnis may have more upside than Cole Maynard, but Maynard's kick last week was 39 yards? If you can get 39 yards consistently and get it out on time, take it and run. So I'm sure they had some healthy competition, or have had healthy competition this week to settle that. It's interesting, the special teams has been a strength the last couple of years, and for Noah Burnett, of course, has been very good. And give him a tip of the cap. He's played very well, and I don't think he's missed. But you've got to really solidify the punting game so it's not a liability. Because you're right, the field position it was just detrimental last week.
Yeah, I've never seen anything like it on that type situation, and that's how upsets happen. All three phases matter. If Carolina could have won one phase of the game last week, they could have won that game, and I think it comes down to that next week. We're going to talk about predictions. Jason, you got anything left before I jump to predictions?
I think we've kind of chewed the meat off of it. I mean, I don't think there's a whole lot really complicated in this game. Run the football on offense against a team that is giving up a lot in the running game, and get your plays off play action and take advantage there, but make sure you're running it well and do what you've done successfully on that. And then on defense, find ways to stop the run better than you did last week. Be willing to to me, if I'm Gene Chizik, which I'm not, I'm willing to take a couple over the top losses, because I'm not convinced that Haynes King is going to hit those consistently enough to hit 4 or 5 or 6 of them to beat me. And I want to take away the run. I want to take away Haynes King's legs and force him to beat me from the pocket. And if those guys do beat my corners, they're fast enough. But I want that. I want a little bit more of the Narduzzi type mentality, even in this game, even though they do have guys that can threaten you deep. I would like to see that. I'm not convinced we will.
The Narduzzi fan club lives amongst Greg Barnes and Jason Staples.
Greg, how much would you contribute to North Carolina to get Narduzzi as the defensive coordinator?
No comment. I would like to see Pat and Gene sit down and have a chat and exchange ideas. I think that'd be worth the pay-per-view fee.
We can line it up. Maybe a big old charity function. We're going to go to predictions. Of course, the predictions portion of this podcast is presented by our friends at Congruity, North Carolina-based national coverage, local presence, and, of course, personal support, personal customer service support. They empower small and mid-sized business owners by payroll and HR outsourcing, so you can take care of growing your business while they take care of your people. They're obsessed with customer service, like I said. I say it again, I'll say it all the time. If it's a sponsor of Inside Carolina, the customer service is top notch, and Congruity is certainly there. And of course, they've got all the fancy technology. They don't have this rock and chisel that I have over here that I take notes on, talk to Greg and Jason. They have the top of the line technology, top of the line online support. Do this if you're a small, mid-sized business owner and you're listening to this podcast or watching. Go to congruityhr.com/Tar Heels. Learn everything you need to know about Congruity, but also fill out the form, the little quick survey that will give you a free assessment and see what they can do for you. Costs you nothing to go see if they can help you grow your business. congruityhr.com/Tar Heels, and check it out. They give Inside Carolina people, North Carolina fans, free assessment. Greg, predictions. You're going first. You hadn't been on here the last couple of weeks, so I'm going to put the spotlight on you first. Predictions: North Carolina goes to Georgia Tech. I think it's a pivotal game. I think it's a very, very important game.
Would you say it's a must-win, Tommy?
I would say it is a must-win. I need a bell like that was easy button that says must-win, must-win, must-win. Greg, your take on what happens?
Yeah, I think Georgia Tech is a good bit better team than Virginia. Last week was really a team loss, as you mentioned, Tommy. Carolina lost all three phases of the game, and maybe just barely, but it all added up to a loss. And I think Carolina is going to have to win with a team effort this week. I mean, I think all three phases need to be strong to be able to win on the road. And I know the spread's 11.5. Unless Carolina wins the turnover margin, I don't see this game being a double-digit victory for UNC. I don't see them covering. I think this is a game where it has the potential to be a shootout. And I think that's very important for the defense, because the defense has shown so much promise through the first 6 games, and I thought they really looked poor last week. And as Jason highlighted, the unwillingness to take away the run kind of contrasted with Carolina's unwillingness just to pound the rock. So did they learn from that, right? And I really think the defense, this is their opportunity to step up. So you know what? We may not be elite quite yet, but last weekend was a fluke. We're better than that. Because if they don't, then this is really going to be a shootout. But I do think Carolina bounces back from the Virginia game. I think Carolina is the more talented team. I think Drake May and Amarian Hampton and that offense is going to respond. I do think it's going to be a competitive game. So Carolina has to play very well, but I think they do it on the road, and I've got North Carolina winning this one 38-31.
Oh, my goodness.
You did not, Jason. Stop.
No, I did not have the same score, but
go
I'm a lot closer than I'm comfortable with here.
We got twins. Isn't that the movie?
I was going to go.
Danny
I'm
DeVito
just going to tell you what I was going to go with. I was going to go with 38-34, but we're in the same ballpark. And you've got me rethinking what I should do on this just for the sake of entertainment. I want to preface with this. Georgia Tech, I think is a significantly better football team than their reputation right now. I think this is a pretty decent team. Interesting thing. Let's look at their record so far this year. So they opened the season with a loss to Louisville, 38-30 or 39-34, right?
They coughed that one up. Yeah,
they did, and they should have won that game, right? They were ahead in the fourth quarter by, I think, 10, right? So loss, win, loss to Mississippi, win Wake Forest, loss Bowling Green, win Miami, loss Boston College, now this one. So they've gone loss, win, loss, win, loss, win, loss, and now this one.
Some SAT stuff. I get where you're going.
I mean, that's uncomfortable, right? If the pattern holds, that's not good for Carolina. I mean, there's variability baked into that, but I think of the teams that they played, the most comparable teams to North Carolina that they've played are that Louisville team and that Mississippi team. I think Mississippi is probably better defensively than North Carolina has been, and offensively, Carolina has comparable firepower, though different, and not as good up front as Ole Miss is. So both of those teams beat Georgia Tech, but Mississippi was that game was 24-17 with 10:30 left in the game, or a little over there's almost 9 minutes left in the game.
It fell apart.
That was a really close game. Georgia Tech very nearly beat them, and there was a bad call actually that cost them. I think it was a pass interference call or whatever that cost them the chance to go up or to tie the game, and then the game kind of snowballed from there. They just kind of ran out of depth. But this is a team that can beat North Carolina. And there's certain things about this matchup that have made me uncomfortable for several weeks. I've looked at this game and gone, and then what happened to Virginia happened, and I was probably going to pick Carolina to lose this game if they'd beaten Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
After last week, I'm not sure that Carolina psychologically is in a place where they're likely to overlook this team, and I do think it's hard to bet against Drake May and all of that. In a game that is likely to have some points scored. So, yeah, I'm going to go with Carolina to win this game, but I like you, Greg. I think this is a game that's a one-score game, most likely. I'm not comfortable with the way that Georgia Tech runs the football, especially with how they involve the quarterback in the running game. And I fully expect to be frustrated with a variety of things in that area this week. So I think this is one of those games that Carolina's going to have to probably win on offense, and you're going to have a better showing from the receivers and also from Drake to be able to win this in addition to running the ball. So I'm going to stick with my score. I'm going to go with 38-34. But I think this game could very easily go the other way. And I think a turnover or two could really change the scope of this game.
Yeah, I agree with everything you guys have said. I'm going to post a comment right here from Trey's in the chat. Has your opinion of Carolina changed, how good they can be after last week, or was it just a one-off stinker? Therein lies the $64 million question.
What do you think, Greg?
Stinker or hiccup? One or trend?
I think it's a hiccup for sure. But as we talked about earlier, I don't know how strong this schedule is. I think the Miami game was a nice one for sure, but also was, in cozy confines of Kenan Stadium, and they had a 4-0 turnover margin. I mean, Miami, like Virginia, were going in for a touchdown and fumbled the ball through the end zone. So I'm not convinced yet that this Carolina team is a top 10 team. But I do think last week was a hiccup. We'll know, this next stretch, Campbell, excluded, this next stretch will tell us a lot, because I think Georgia Tech, as we've laid out, will be a tough game Saturday. I think Duke's really good. If Riley Leonard is 100%, watch out. At Clemson, even though Klubnik's has some issues, that's going to be tough. And then State's a true rivalry game. So we'll have a full understanding of what this team's made of by the end of the season. I'm just not comfortable saying how good I think they are right now, because I'm just not sure.
It's crazy how it works.
I'm in a similar boat. I've been skeptical. I mean, some folks have kind of, I think, maybe gotten frustrated with me at different points this season, because I've been a bit skeptical about the overall consistency level that this team is capable of, or what their ceiling is realistically. Because, and you've heard me say this multiple times, Greg, great teams. This came up early in the show. Great teams don't lose games like that. Yes, but great teams don't have some of the limitations that Carolina does up front. And the concern that I have is Carolina, I think, is as good as anybody at the skill positions right now. I just don't think that they are in that, elite cut of teams, or even the, very good, quadrant of teams, or higher than quadrant. They're not a top 10% team on the line of scrimmage. And the list of teams that you just named, Duke is a line of scrimmage team. Clemson is less of a line of scrimmage team than they have been, but they've got more up front than everybody you played except for Miami. For whatever they are, NC State is always a line of scrimmage team. And, that's the concern I have. And so my opinion hasn't changed. It just further reinforced my concerns about some of the limitations of this team.
And Tommy, I'll lay this out too. Jason mentioned inconsistency. What does that mean? Well, I won't put words in Jason's mouth, but if you put Carolina and Florida State in the ACC Championship game the first week in December, can Carolina beat FSU?
Absolutely.
Yes. If they play 10 times, how many times is Carolina going to win? And that's the difference. Because of Carolina's inconsistency, there's going to be a couple games there where FSU blows them out. But Carolina has the guns to be able to compete and win that game.
They can win a shootout against Florida State. Absolutely.
Yeah. But it's the inconsistency, like what we saw against Virginia, where you're not exactly sure, are they going to be clicking on all cylinders? And that's really what separates good teams from great teams.
And if this team is not clicking on all cylinders, they're not winning those games. Right. Florida State beat Clemson, beat LSU, and beat Duke with less than their A game in all of those games because they've got some dudes up front, essentially. I mean, that's one of the big factors there. They've got more depth. They can kind of screw around a little bit more and have a little more margin for error. The problem is that I think this Carolina team just doesn't have a lot of margin for error. I think it's a good football team, and I think its ceiling is really, really high. They can beat just about anybody, maybe anybody this season in college football, but the margin for error is really small. And they, against some of those teams, they're going to need a couple turnovers. They're going to need to be able to hit you can't have a couple drops. You're going to lose that game. The margin for error is just really thin with this team. And that's what concerns me. I think the margin for error is limited even against the Georgia Tech.
Yep. North Carolina, I want to say it was a hiccup or a stinker last week and they bounced back. I do think, and I said it and you guys have talked about it, I think losing that game last weekend focuses them up more than they would have been focused going into Georgia Tech this week. Yep. I'm going to go 33-27, and Georgia Tech has the ball on the last drive with a 6-point lead for North Carolina. I really cherish my indigestion on Saturday nights. 8:00 game. I mean, if you ever was needed a nooner, this was it. But it'll be 8:00 down in Atlanta, Georgia Tech, North Carolina. Jason Staples, Greg Barnes. It's fun to have the band back together for a long, almost hour and a half game plan. And folks, if you're listening to us on the audio side of it, the audio is attached for Next Level with Chad Bishop, Georgia Tech beat writer. So stay after the break. And after the commercials, check out that. Shout out to Johnny T-Shirt and Congruity, sponsors of this show. Shout out to everybody that stayed with us in chat. Last check, Syracuse has done Syracuse things. Virginia Tech up 35-10 at the end of the third quarter.
Weapons.
Hey, so this might be good for the after show, but Virginia Tech holds on here. They've play Louisville, Boston College, NC State, and Virginia to close out the season.
I'm going to say something that North Carolina fans are going to hate. Except for one game at the end of the season, folks need to be pulling for NC State football. To beat Virginia Tech, they should have beaten Louisville. That would have helped North Carolina. And now I'm going to go wash off. We'll talk after the break.
Hold on. They say nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition, but right about now, I'm expecting them to run into that room and put you on the rack.
I'm just going to disappear. I'm going to pull the Greg thing. But, yeah, I mean, it's important. You've got the way this mess stacks up with the uneven schedules, you get a lot of people involved in the ACC Championship race that have no business being in it.
Carolina just has to take care of their business. That's the
handle business, exactly. It's been fun, guys. We'll talk in the after party. Only super premium people get in the after party. You got to have the golden ticket. Preston, you're right. I committed a bad sin. I am sorry.
Yeah, that's a no-no, man. You better lock your doors.
I've people are going all in. It's been fun. I live in a
Oh, I
neighborhood
just
full of
saw
state
bless
fans.
your heart. Wow.
I
in the
know,
chat.
really.
That's severe.
I'm getting old, folks. I'm getting out of here. It's been fun. It's been the game plan with Jason and Greg. Atlanta. Trip to Atlanta on Halloween. What are we talking about? Laters.